Our next video on the garden and the local church focuses just on verse 15. We've seen in the earlier verses God formed Adam from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. Now we drop down to verse 15. Then the Lord God took the man and put him into the Garden of Eden to cultivate it and to keep it. And the two things I want to think about is the fact that for Adam, the garden was his workplace. And the second thing was that he was to preserve what God had created. And those 2 points are very relevant in relation to the local church. First of all, it was Adam's workplace. He was to cultivate it. So we see already that God's purpose for humans is work. But in the dimension that we're looking at, we see that the local church is primarily a place of work. And by that we mean work in the local church, whether it be on a practical level, or necessarily on a spiritual level, but it is work. I think that's a very important thing to focus our minds as Christians. We are to work with God, and we're also to work with each other. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, I read these verses in another part of the video, but 1 Corinthians 3, verse 8. Now he that plants and he that waters are one, referring to Paul and Apollos. And here's our verse: every man that receives, so he shall receive his own reward according to his own labor. And the emphasis I want to here is that it's labor, it's hard work. Labor means intense work, working to the point of exhaustion. And I wonder if our local churches were filled with Christians who work to the point of exhaustion, would they look any different than what they are today? I'm sure they would. But then verse 9 says, 1 Corinthians 3 verse 9 says, we are laborers together with God. So it's not just that we're working, we're actually working with God. I think that's a massive thing to remember, is that we can only work and serve God effectively if we're doing it with God, staying connected to Him and asking for His guidance and direction in our lives. And the second thing from back from Genesis 2 was he was not only to cultivate it, he was to keep it. It was to be maintained and preserved. And those ideas are still the same in relation to the local church. You remember Peter in John chapter 21, when he had messed up and he thought God wasn't going to use him again. Of course, the Lord had to restore him, which is what this chapter is about. But you remember 3 times the Lord asked him a question: Simon Peter, son of Jonah, do you love me more than these? Was the first question. And Peter answers in the affirmative all 3 times. Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And then, of course, we get the commands from Jesus. Feed my lambs, shepherd my sheep, and feed my sheep. And this idea of tending and keeping is the idea, whether it be lambs, those who are younger in the faith, or sheep, which are a bit more older and wiser. They needed tending and they needed shepherding. And then, of course, one of the ways Peter did that was through his preaching, but also through his letters that he wrote, 1st and 2nd Peter, and in chapter 5 of 1st Peter, you can see that Peter remembers this as he's writing to the shepherds in 1st Peter. 1st Peter 5 verse 2, feed, the word is tend or shepherd. the flock of God which is among you, taking the oversight not by constraint but willingly, not for filthy lucre, but for a ready mind, neither as being lords over God's heritage. Notice that word, heritage. But being ensamples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd shall appear, you will receive a crown of glory that does not fade away. Shepherd, tend the flock of God. And then in verse 3, he mentioned as neither as being lords over God's heritage. So we've got the same idea of cultivation that needs developing, but the leadership is to be not as being lords, but as being ensamples to the flock. So we can see these connections in Genesis chapter 2, quite fascinating once you develop them. Thank you for listening.